My life has been a masterfully handwritten, self-published body of work, plagiarized by rejection. But isn't it crazy how my current life looks nothing like the short stories and passages my wounds wanted me to believe? My name is Tasha, and this is God, You Play Too Much, the podcast.
Welcome to another episode of God, You Play Too Much, the podcast. My name is Tasha, your host. And today's episode, we're going to be talking about from the homeless shelter to the penthouse. Won't he do it? From the homeless shelter to the penthouse. I'm going to share with you how I met God. Now, you would think that because I grew up in the church my entire life, I grew up in a super saved house. We couldn't listen to secular music. There was no cussing, no drinking, no partying. There was none of that. We were in church 11 times a week, Bible study, Sunday school, choir rehearsal, missionary meeting, junior mission. I was churched, yet I did not know him. Um, I even became a pastor's wife at 23 years old. And by that time, I knew of him, but I still didn't know him. And the crazy thing is, you don't know that you don't know him until you encounter him. So, as a pastor's wife, God graced me to still be effective. I always had this, I always had this reverence for him. You understand? I would talk to him. Um, But again, I didn't know him. And a part of the reason why I didn't know him was because when you grow up church, you're busy doing the routines and like serving and, doing all the things that you don't get a formal introduction to him. You know, it's almost like you get to know him by osmosis because of your environment, because of the musicals you go to, the services you attend, the meetings you attend. uh, like I was saying, he graced me to be effective as a pastor's wife. I was over our youth department. I, led worship from time to time. I spoke at women's meetings, prayer breakfasts. I was over our dance ministry. I had the zeal to do the work, right? I had the zeal to serve, but again, I had no idea that I didn't know him. I didn't meet him until January 1st, 2016. A few months prior to I left my ex-husband. And that's a whole nother story. I jumped off of a moving train, meaning if I didn't leave, I do believe my life was at stake, and not because he was going to take my life, but I would have, you know. Um, when I left him, I left with nothing, no car, no job, no money, no nothing. But I knew I needed to jump off the moving train. And the funny thing about jumping off of a moving train is it hurt. you know, you tumble, you fall, you may break some limbs. But yeah, me jumping off the train, I think, was the beginning of this journey. I came back home to Houston to live with a family member. Um, that was very short lived. There was a family argument that resulted into me being kicked out of the house. And even though she knew I had nowhere to go, she knew I had nothing. Um, she put me out. And to this day, I believe that it was unwarranted, but we're not here for that. This happened the day after Christmas. And so I didn't know who to call. I called my ex husband. He was very clear, hey, you can't come back here, but let me call around and see what I can come up with. And so, mind you, he was still in Victoria. That's where he pastored, and that's where I used to live at the time. That's where I lived before. So he calls back like 2 days later, and he says, "Hey, there's this place called the House of Dreams, and they have an opening, and they're willing to take you. Can you get there by so and so date?" I was like, "Okay, cool." I said yes. I mean, at this point, I have no choice. So I remember I called two of my church members, um, Treese and Shayla. Shout out to you girls. I called them, and because again, I didn't have a car. And Treese said, I'll take you. So watch night service was coming around. And the plan was right after watch night service, we'll drive down to Victoria and I'll drop you off. I remember sitting in that service being so heartbroken, so embarrassed. Um, I mean, wallowing in rejection and confusion and anger. We get in the car and we hit 59 South and we're heading toward Victoria. I really didn't know what to expect when I got to this place called the House of Dreams. So we get there, and Treese is still with me. She stays with me until until we check everything out and make sure that I'm actually going to be able to stay here. When I met with the director of the house, um, she presented me with how the program worked. The House of Dreams was a program affiliated with a local church in the area. A major rule in this house was if you came in this house unemployed, that you had to remain unemployed for 90 days. And within those 90 days, the House of Dreams would provide every need that you would have: food, obviously shelter, transportation to appointments, um, help with your prescriptions. I mean, every need that you would have. The philosophy was if we take care of all of your needs and free up your mind, we'll now be able to give you as much Jesus, as much kingdom as you can stand. Very much, why give a man a fish when you can teach him how to fish, right? Um, there was also no outside contact while you were in the program at the House of Dreams. I had to turn in my cell phone. It was from time to time, like I want to say like maybe a couple of times a week, you were able to make calls, but very quickly you had to, turn in your phone again. There was no outside food. There was no fast food being brought in, no sugar in the house. This place was was this place was filled with a lot of what you can't do. But what was I gonna do? I had to sign, you know. I had nowhere to go. After agreeing to all of the don'ts and the few do's to this program, Treese left, and I was sitting in the foyer of the House of Dreams. The director was now going to go get my bed together, kind of prepare the space that I was going to be. And while I was sitting in the foyer, out loud, I say to God, say, man, you got one shot. And if you don't come through like you say you do, it's over, brother. Me and you, we not cool. Don't talk to me. I won't talk to you. We can go our separate ways. Okay? If you say that everything in this book, from Genesis to Revelation, is truth, then Jeremiah 29:11 is truth. Now, I don't know where I got that from. Okay? That dropped in my spirit. For I know the plans that I have for you, plans to prosper you, never to harm you, to bring you a hope and a future, depending on the translation that you read. I said, so I'm going to choose to trust you blindly, okay? If you say the sky is orange and I look up and the sky is blue, I'm going to say the sky is orange. I'm going to trust you blindly. But if you don't come through, we're done. It was like God said, bet. And so, in this isolation and solitude, I had a formal introduction to who God is. to what he says about me and what he says about my life. Um, no one in my family knew where I was. I had quite frankly disappeared. The only person that knew where I was my ex husband, because obviously he was the one that brought me. I mean, you know, he was the one that informed me about the place, and he would bring my son there to the premises so that I could spend time with my son. So I felt like I had no one. It's crazy how a lot of us meet God in the valley. We meet him when we have no other option, because that's when we have no choice but to try him. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. That's when we have no other choice but to believe what he says and trust him. I understand now that the house of dreams was a gift. Very rarely do we have the opportunity in our adulthood to cut every other distraction off. I had no responsibilities to worry about. I had no social life to worry about. There was no contact, so outside voices, outside stimuli couldn't taint what was happening within the walls of that shelter for me. God really orchestrated a season of my life where it was just me and him. It was in the house of dreams where I learned how to love myself. It was in the house of dreams where I learned who I was, strictly based on who God says I am. It was the house of dreams. It was at the house of dreams where I began to come out of agreement with lies that I had believed and told myself since I was in kindergarten. From the time I left my ex husband to the time of this shelter, I was going through a true identity crisis. It was I was so confused that even when I had paperwork to sign at the House of Dreams, I didn't know how to sign my name. I didn't know if I was signing my name with my marital name or my maiden name. I didn't know if I was believing God for reconciliation or if I was trusting God to make me whole. I thank God for the shelter. You know, the shelter gave me structure when my life was topsy turvy. I didn't know my up from my down. Okay, it was everyone up at 6:30. From by 7:15, you need to be in the kitchen prepared. By 7:15, we need to be in the kitchen preparing our breakfast. From at 7:30, we need to be at the breakfast table eating. From 7:30 to 8 o'clock, that was our time to clean, do whatever chores that we had to do in the morning, as well as finish getting ready for the day. We have that. If you want to do your hair, if you want to do makeup, that was your time to do it. After that, we were going into a Bible study. After that Bible study, it was now prayer time. After that prayer time, you got some free time, but the free time was limited because you were only on the premises. There was no TV, right? Um, yeah, in that environment, God was God God stripped away every other excuse, every other distraction, and I met him there. When I met him, I I couldn't believe that I had been living my life so close to him but so far. I knew him adjacent, you know? Um and it was in that shelter where he began to change me instead of my situation. I still had no job, I still had no money, I still couldn't provide for myself, but now I had identity and purpose. Now I had learned to count it all joy. Now I had learned to I had learned how to experience true gratitude, right? So when it was time for me to leave, I took all these principles that I've learned, all the truths that I learned, and I continued to build on them. I There was a fire that was ignited in me at the House of Dreams that is yet to be put out. When I discovered that he was real, and not only real, but he wanted me, I began to chase after him like a crackhead chase after crack. All I wanted was worship in my ear. Okay, I was always listening to some sermon or some teaching. Um, um, I I I wanted him more than anything. I got this understanding that I can only live up to my fullest potential. I can only live a life of joy, live a life of peace with him. So I would say that it was in the House of Dreams where my ear was fine tuned. I can recognize that I've always heard the voice of God in my ear my entire life, but I didn't know that it was Him. And I could say that it was muffled. That after my experience and my stay in the House of Dreams, I could hear Him crystal clear. And this doesn't mean that I didn't struggle with sin. It doesn't mean that I didn't struggle with mental torment. It doesn't mean that I was perfect, that I was all of a sudden turned down and turned away from every bad habit. But it meant that I was committed to the sanctification process. I was committed to being purified. I was willingly giving myself as an offering to him. I felt like that was the least that I could do. I mean, with everything that kept me from and shielded me from in my life and everything he had brought me through, not to mention, I mean, we're not gonna even talk about salvation. I felt like that was the least that I could do. And so yeah, people look at me now and they're like, "Oh, your life seems so nice. You live in the penthouse, you have an awesome husband, your family looks picture perfect." Everything that makes up my life now is just a promise fulfilled. The promise could not be fulfilled if I didn't uphold my end of the bargain. What was my end of the bargain? Well, that first day in the House of Dreams in that foyer, when I gave God this ultimatum, I upheld my end. I trust him blindly. His truth is my truth. Because I trust him blindly, I was able to learn how to love myself. I learned how to accept his creation. That no, I'm not too much. I'm not dramatic. I'm not this. I'm not that I am exactly how he wanted me to be to in order to fulfill the purpose that he would have me to fulfill. There was nothing about me that was made on accident. There was nothing that I was encountering in my life that was by happenstance. Everything from childhood rejection to church hurt was all a part of him getting the glory. There is no way that I can look at my life and say that I did anything extraordinary other than chasing him, other than believing him. And so, because of my experience, it's made me realize that our churches can be filled with a lot of people that think they believe, but don't. A lot of people that identify as Christian, but really don't, but have yet to have an encounter with him or meet him. And so, I encourage you, that the person watching, whether you are new in the faith, whether you don't believe, or you've been saved for 30 years, to open your mouth and talk to him. Open your mouth and talk to him and listen for the response. If you belong to him, you hear his voice. You may not be discerning that it's him, but you do hear him. That is the beginning of your life transforming. That is the beginning of you becoming the head and not the tail, above and not beneath, the lender, not the borrower. That's all nice, and those are all promises, but you have to uphold your end of the bargain. So yeah, uh, that's a bit of my testimony. I hope that it encourages someone. I hope that it shines some light on how to go about initiating this relationship with him. I want to leave you with this. If you do not know God, there is no way that you can know his plans for you. If you haven't encountered him, his transformative power, um, can't begin to transform. So would, I'm begging you to make sure that the vertical connection is established. It is awesome to know scripture and to be able to recite addresses, but it's not, exercising your faith isn't looking at someone else's story and mimicking what they did. It is hearing the voice of God concerning your life and you obeying. It is in every act of obedience, whether big or small, that leads you now into the promise. So, how did my life get to look like this? I want to say being obsessed with him, wanting him more than I want anything else. And so, yeah, thank you for sitting with me through this episode. I would love to hear your first encounters with him. How did you meet him? How were you introduced? You know, do you feel that you know him adjacent? Do you feel that you know him by osmosis? You know, because you grew up in the church, um, you know of him. You've seen him work in other people's life, but you haven't seen him work in yours. Let's have this conversation. Let's remember that we overcome by the word of our testimonies. I love you guys. See you next episode. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to share. Okay. Send someone this video so you guys can have a good conversation about it. Don't forget to follow me on all social media platforms, from TikTok to Instagram, Facebook. There's just so much that God is cooking up and I'm excited about. And I really want you guys to be a part of it. I want us to share in this experience. So, yeah, again, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.